When you think of a fictional character who's a hero, what comes to mind? Protecting the innocent, fighting for what is right, sacrificing for a greater good? Well, I think whatever your definition is, you're gonna find tons of heroes in the Halo series. When I was a kid and I first played Combat Evolved, I was in awe at just the levels of badassery achieved by the good guys. From Captain Keyes down to the lowly Marines that fight alongside the Chief. This intergalactic conflict truly demands the finest amongst all humanity rise to the occasion. And even in Halo 2, when you meet the Arbiter, you see that these traits are something that transcend any species lines. But one character that has always left a massive impact on me, and I know millions of others, is Sergeant Avery Johnson.
Chief is gonna jump in this tank, roll across the bridge, and blow up any inhuman son of a bitch dumb enough to get between him and the Prophet of Regret. Pull yourself together, because you're going with it.
Sergeant Johnson is absolutely iconic. In this crazy sci-fi universe of big complicated plots and alien schemes, Johnson somehow always keeps it together and keeps it real. And Avery is, way up there in the food chain as far as characters that are directly involved with the plot of these games. How many characters can say that they're close friends with the Master Chief? It's a pretty big deal. So let's do this. Let's learn about the heroics, bravery, life, and mustache, of course, of Sergeant Johnson. And before we get to it, like always, make sure you like the video down below if you like it, and subscribe for more videos that are just like this one.
Damn right I am. Now move it out. Double time.
Now let's first lay some groundwork as far as who Johnson really is, where he comes from. I know the first time we see him in-game, he's already this seasoned military man who commands respect. But Halo has expanded now to so many novels, comics, shows, etc., that we have a pretty complete picture of the life of this character. Avery Jr. Johnson was born on Earth sometime between the year 2477 and 2482 in the greater Chicago industrial zone. This is kind of like a huge sprawl city that covered much of the Midwest, including all the surrounding states of the original American city. Places like Indiana and Wisconsin is huge. As a young kid, his parents went through a pretty brutal divorce, and this left his mother mentally unfit to take care of the little guy. But Avery's aunt stepped in, thankfully, and volunteered to raise and look after him just as he turned 6 years old. This aunt, Marcille, would end up being a key influence and role model for Avery to follow. Marcille was a devoutly religious evangelical promesic, which is a branch of what you and I here in the Stone Age in 2021 known as Christianity. Her religious practices definitely rubbed off on Avery, and he accompanied her to church every single Sunday. She taught him important things like always do the right thing, no matter how hard it may be. Remain honest and always work harder than the person right next to you. And as Avery grew, those principles led him to have an interest in the armed forces. So, at the age of 19, he enlisted in the United Nations Space Command Marine Corps, baby. He really enlisted because he felt that a growing conflict known as the insurrection would potentially threaten the lives of innocent and good people just like his dear Aunt Marcille. Protecting people like this was a cause worth dying for Avery. So the insurrection was essentially a civil war without anyone outright declaring it so. It was fought between the United Earth Government, the main civilian government of the Earth and its colonies, and various rebel groups wanting autonomy. Johnson jumped right into action as a young Marine, and he proved himself to be very useful. Bright, brave, and definitely a natural leader. His quick ascension of the ranks and obvious skills in battle got him some attention from within, and he was chosen to be a part of something called the Orion Project. Now this is huge. This was the first effort to create biologically augmented super soldiers, a special force a cut above your average human, so that the UNSC could avoid issues just like the insurrection, now and into the future. For all the procedures and training, Johnson and the others selected were moved from Earth to the planet of Reach. Along with the augmentations and the cheat codes that they downloaded into this fool, Johnson was also enrolled in Sniper School, where he yet again dusted the competition and quickly put himself ahead of the pack as far as wits, ability, and of course his trademark attitude.
Oh yeah!
And after this, Johnson was involved in, tons of various Black Ops missions, all in that effort to crush the insurrectionists all over Earth and the colonies. One such mission was Operation Kaleidoscope, where Johnson succeeded in assassinating an insurrectionist leader named Jared Adler. But in 2506, the Orion Project was dismantled, defunded, and Johnson reassigned back into the main forces of the UNSC. Now, the insurrection was still the main issue on the hands of the armed forces, with bombings and armed conflict becoming more and more commonplace. And this is really the conflict that took up the bulk of Johnson's life and service. From the planet Harvest all the way to Tribute, the UNSC attempted to put out these little fires. And it's notable, my dudes, that every time Avery Johnson killed another human being, it pained him greatly. He did not like that feeling. He was always a badass, of course, but he was also human. He often thought of his aunt and the lessons learned from a humble upbringing, but those principles and his abilities were put to the test during a mission on Tribute known as Operation Trebuchet in 2524. The goal of this mission was to stamp out a rebel effort to create bombs and circulate them to the colonies. This culminated in a moment that would be a very, very bad one for Johnson. The rebels had been mixing explosives into the synthetic rubber of tires. That's a dirty plan. Tracking this explosive compound led them to a diner, where they targeted a woman inside with more explosives in her purse. Obviously a pretty sticky situation. The climax of this encounter saw the rebel grab a nearby child to use as a shield from gunfire while threatening to detonate the explosives on her. Meanwhile, Johnson looked on, of course, as a sniper. He was ordered to take the shot, take the woman out before any innocents or Marines could be harmed, but he delayed in an effort to assure that the kid wouldn't get hit by his shot. He was so scared of hitting the child that he ended up waiting too long. The child's father lunged toward the woman and she detonated the explosives, killing everybody inside, a total of 39 dead. Terrible, man. Terrible. Can you imagine? I can't because I'm not an outer space army man. This incident, though, got Johnson sent home to Earth for a while, where he then discovered that his aunt had passed away from natural causes. Man, what a shitty week. And this is where Johnson went into a dark place of drinking profusely. His life quickly spiraled out of control with addiction and violence. On one particular night, he got into an altercation with some nightclub bouncers while drunk and ended up beaten and passed out in a gutter. This is like the all-time low for the sergeant, no doubt about it. But he happened to be found by a UNSC military recruiter who recognized him and assisted Johnson to set him back on track. After cleaning up his act and accepting his grave mistake, he was reassigned to active duty on the World of Harvest. Officially, he was there to train the militia, but was secretly a part of yet another anti-insurgency operation in the system. And this is where Johnson actually meets Jenkins, his long-term whipping boy that we get to hear him talk smack to in Halo 1. He was also reunited with another military man, Nolan Byrne. It was his men who were lost when Johnson failed to shoot the woman back on Tribute. So pretty damn awkward, and the two got into a little dust-up, but it ended up working out, as here on Harvest, an event took place that would shake all of humanity and unite them under one common foe. First contact with the Covenant, baby. This is where Sergeant Johnson goes from being this cool dude to a bad, bad man. Now, the Covenant have their own crazy reasons for coming to Harvest, and that's not a story we will bother touching on here today. But basically, while lying in wait on a freighter, Johnson and Byrne encountered several extraterrestrials, engaged them, and killed them. They were described as bird-like, meaning they were probably the Kig-Yar, or like jackals. Now, from the beginning of this conflict with the Covenant, Johnson was a central figure in the action. He was present for meetings between the brutes and the humans, he fought against Tartarus and other brute leaders, and he really saw up close and personal all that the Covenant were capable of. The Sergeant was quickly making himself into an even more vital weapon and really tool for humanity. I just gotta say, I really love this backstory, man. I mean, we don't get a whole bunch of Johnson in the game, so it's so cool to have this connective stuff. It's just so easy and cheap to create a hero who's just good because some writer said so. The best characters are always the ones who struggle with their own personal demons and overcome them in some way, or at least learn to live with them. Sergeant Johnson is a great example of this. It's very human and it makes a character even more likable and easy to root for. I think that's why so many people, including myself, have always really loved Batman, especially when compared to someone like Superman. I mean, I'm sorry superfans out there of Superman, but the fool's an alien and he's so stupid strong, and I know there is some depth and backstory there. Don't type down in the comments. I can hear you clicking already. The point is, Batman more reminds us of us. He's gone through some bad stuff, and he's able to overcome those things and fight for a greater good. Now, you remember that poopy feeling Johnson would have when he had to kill his fellow humans? Well, he got to put that completely aside with the Covenant and just go ham. Not an issue. And moving into the conflict, of course, he was heavily involved leading various assaults and defenses over years, really. But meanwhile, in the background, the UNSC was working on a little project known as the Spartan 2 program, a follow-up to Project Orion in which Johnson got all of his augmentations and training. Now, with all of Johnson's leadership qualities and experience with Orion, he was tapped to guide and teach these young Spartans as they were still only 15 years old. And although he was kind of pissed to be like a babysitter, he understood that the Spartans' success could mean turning the tide of the war and kicking some serious Covenant tushy. This program is, of course, where John 117, the Master Chief, comes into the fold, baby, on an ensuing mission known as Silent Storm. And don't you just love all these fictional military code names, man? They're so funny to me. The human forces were taking a swipe at the Covenant to buy some time for the UNSC to regroup. Now, I think of the Spartan training kind of like a mix between the literal Spartans, like in the movie 300, and like Jedi training. These kids were super superior to all of their peers, and they were identified by the UNSC for training and augments at an extremely young age. We're talking like 6 years old or younger. The training was based, just like before, on the planet Reach. But to be honest, these Spartans only being in their teens doesn't really mean much. They're already killing machines, honestly, with unbreakable bones, all hugely tall, and all that good stuff. Superhumans. So during the briefing for this mission, Silent Storm, the commanding officer laid out a plan that kind of wasted the potential of the Spartans, and John 117 voiced his concern. This hurt the officer's ego a little bit, but Sergeant Johnson was there to back up John, pretty much saying, hey man, you groomed this kid to be a weapon mentally and physically, let him lead. Of course, it worked out perfectly, and upon completion of the task, John was given that rank of Master Chief Petty Officer, so thanks for that, Johnson. And I mention this only because this is when the two really became close friends. Now, as far as like the Spartan 2 program and Project Orion, I kind of think of Johnson like the iPhone 1 and John 117 as the iPhone 16 or whatever the number they're on now. I don't know which one. In the time that Johnson had done all this stuff, seen all this war, the new generation of super soldiers were here and would change literally everything. Super advanced, and Johnson is just down as hell. There is, however, a little twist during this Silent Storm mission. Half of the crew involved aboard one of the UNSC vessels were insurrectionists in disguise. You remember those clowns? And they attempted to betray the boys over to the Covenant. With the Spartans and John in combat, Johnson found himself mostly alone amongst traitors, but he was still able to kill 7 of them alone and put up a hell of a fight. But sadly, he was ejected out into space along with some still loyal soldiers and left to die. He was in a sort of spacesuit, so he didn't die immediately, but he did nearly freeze to death out there. But you know, he was rescued by our boy Master Chief just as he was slipping into unconsciousness. The bond grows deeper. So okay, I mean, Sergeant Johnson has obviously been through a lot. And all of this backstory really comes from books, comics, etc. We haven't even gotten to Halo 1 yet. But I think all of this is just to say, this is a seasoned old dog. He has seen so much war. He's felt triumph, betrayal, heartbreak, regret, bloodlust, you name it. That begs the question, what is this old hero fighting for? How does he hold on? Well, I truly believe he is fighting for the soldier right next to him. Even Jenkins. He lives and dies for his men, man, for Earth, loyalty, and honor. And as we get to the events of the games here, remember who Johnson is, because that's really what the bulk of this video is about, not what he does in the games. Remember where he came from and what he has seen, because before the end, his heroics will be put to the ultimate test.
Oh, I know what the ladies like.
So, during the events of Halo Reach, the prequel, the Sergeant was actually very present. Now, we all know the fate of the planet, as the novel the game is based on is called The Fall of Reach. So the Covenant obviously whooped some ass there and glassed the whole world, but the Sergeant was of course able to escape along with his men. The group led by Johnson then boarded the UNSC Pillar of Autumn led by Captain Keyes. Meanwhile, John 117 had been placed in cryosleep after the betrayal during Silent Storm and was also here catching some Z's on the Pillar of Autumn. How convenient. As the Pillar of Autumn escaped Reach and slid into slip space, it came upon a strange sight. A titular sight. A halo ring. The Covenant were still in pursuit of any UNSC vessels, and that of course included the Autumn. So here they were, but they didn't want to potentially damage the halo disk for Covenant reasons, so instead boarded the ship to clear out the Pillar of Autumn and make sure no living humans would know that this halo even existed. Okay, so quick break here. I just want to say that Halo lore can get expansive and pretty crazy pretty quick. And I've already felt the tickle of myself doing it. So for the sake of my brain and just editing this video, I'm gonna from here try to stick pretty close to the Sergeant and what he's up to, much of it being in relation to the Chief. Alright, let's go. So the fight is on, dudes, and Halo 1 is underway. We get an early look at Sergeant Johnson here aboard the Autumn addressing his men. But did you know? His speech is different depending on which difficulty you select.
Keep your eyes downrange, fingers on your triggers, and we all go home in one piece. Am I right, Marines? Sir, yes, sir! Damn right I am.
It's a pretty damn cool detail. Now, it's clear right away, and remember that back in the day, we knew nothing about this guy at all, that he was certainly in charge, a classic drill sergeant type
All you
voice.
greenhorns who wanted to see Covenant up close, this is gonna be your lucky day.
I mean, he's nice and even. He's not nervous. He lives for this shit, baby. Meanwhile, the chief is getting his wake-up call, and the game is getting ready to throw you into the action right away. As the chief is fighting through the Covenant aboard the Autumn, so too is Johnson with his men. And when Captain Keyes makes the call for everyone to evacuate, so too does Johnson. And just like the chief, he has a rough landing on the Halo ring. When you find him, he is very glad to have some support from his old buddy. So this Halo ring is known as Installation 04. And there are, of course, others like it. But at the time, little to nothing was known about it or what its purpose was. So, Johnson and Captain Keyes led a small force on the surface sometime later with the intention of intercepting a Covenant shipment of weapons. They would end up finding something much more grim. When their mission led them underground into a structure on the surface of the ring, they found some elites and other Covenant ripped apart. Very gruesome sight. Johnson and Keyes assumed that this was just infighting or something like that, so they pressed on straight into an ambush. This is first contact for the UNSC and Flood.
Corporal, do you copy? Over. Mendoza, get your ass back up to second squad's position and find out what the hell is going on. But I don't have time for your lip, soldier. I gave you an order.
Listen! What is that?
Where's that coming from, Mendoza?
I don't... There! Mira! Hold still! Hold still!
Let him have it.
What a horrifying experience it must have been. Johnson watched as his soldiers were mutated and turned against him on the fly, having to gun down his friends out of necessity. Johnson was able to escape this encounter safely, though. So how? Plot armor? Powerful mustache? Well, yes. But what if I told you it was because the Flood didn't have any interest in him because of something called Boren syndrome? What if I told you he developed this syndrome from radiation damage as a result of exposure to plasma grenades? That this syndrome scrambled his neurosystem and DNA so much that the Flood couldn't get a hold of it and zombify him? Because that is what the official report by the UNSC was. But it's a lie, boys. A lie to cover up the Project Orion that Sarge was a part of when he essentially became superhuman. So even in times of crazy zombie aliens, you gotta keep that classified, baby. And look at what Boren syndrome would shorthand as. Yeah, it's BS, dude. The Sergeant was just so finely tuned as a killing machine, those little popcorn shrimp couldn't best him. So Halo 1 is going by and the Sergeant is able to escape the Halo ring by the end, just before it gets blown up. But the whole time, Master Chief, having seen the recording of Johnson and his men getting slapped, he thought the Sergeant was very dead. And I have to mention, the ending here, if you've completed the game on Legendary, where you see the Sergeant on the surface hugging and copping a feel on an elite, sadly isn't canon. Just a goofy image to reward you for putting yourself through hell on Legendary, I guess. So, following this, chronologically speaking, a novel called First Strike tells the story of the survivors of Installation 04 and the Fall of Reach raiding a huge Covenant space station. The Covenant had found the location of Earth, and quick action was needed. Now, I have personally not read this one actually, so I'm not going to go too deep into these events because I don't want to get anything wrong. But of course, Johnson was shoulder to shoulder with the Chief and other principal characters throughout. And an interesting takeaway was the Chief reviewing Johnson's medical history to determine how he survived the Flood attack. So he uncovered that Boren syndrome shtick. But fearing for his friend's life and thinking that the UNSC would want to learn more about this syndrome by, dissecting the Sergeant, the Chief destroyed the data to preserve his friend's life. I love this, man. Just guys being dudes, eh? Overall, Johnson played a pretty small role in the execution of this mission, but did have the idea to take the fight right to the Covenant after they found out where Earth was. So a big, bold move by a big, bold dude right there. As Halo 2 opens up, the Sergeant and Master Chief are being recognized for their feats and bravery in the conflict on Installation 04 and beyond.
You told me there wouldn't be any cameras.
And you told me you were gonna wear something nice. Folks need heroes, Chief, to give them hope. So smile, would you? Well, we still got something to smile about.
The cutscene is simultaneously introducing us to a whole new character to the equation. An elite? Covenant? Wait, I thought these dudes were just alien cannon fodder dummies. They have feelings? But we'll get back to that. During the ceremony, the Prophets and Covenant were heading toward Earth to start some serious trouble. And if we have learned anything about the Sergeant, messing with Earth would be enough to make this man go Super Saiyan 3. And the same goes for Master Chief. So off we go with Halo 2, starting of course with the invasion and ensuing battle for Earth. Johnson took part in a critical defense of Cairo Station, a vital UNSC orbital defense station in orbit around Earth. But as the battle moved planet-side, Johnson provided cover fire and assistance to the Chief, things like dropping off a tank, while also attempting to target the ship carrying the Prophet of Regret.
Bastards, we regret coming to Earth. And we most definitely regret the Corps just blew up our raggedy-ass fleet. Hoorah!
Regret is a name, Sergeant. The name of one of the Covenant's religious leaders, a prophet. He's on that carrier.
And really, as the games rolled on from Halo 1 into 2 and eventually 3, Sergeant Johnson really became like the sidekick to the player. As Master Chief, we're doing a lot of heavy lifting, but the Sergeant would kind of flicker in and out of the action to provide vital intel or assistance, and definitely to say some funny stuff. Just an amazing presence in the game whenever you do get to see him in his glorious mustache. So blah blah blah, more war stuff goes on, and the Covenant are chased away after the destruction of a Scarab, with the Chief, Sergeant Johnson, and now Miranda Keyes, the daughter of the great Captain Keyes, jumping into a leadership role. They are able to hitch a ride, Millennium Falcon style, through slip space on the Covenant vessel, and are met with something unexpected.
Jump, Sergeant. You in one piece?
I'm good. Chief?
We're fine.
Ma'am, there's an object coming into view now.
Cortana, what exactly am I looking at?
That is another Halo.
Say what?
Sergeant Johnson's reaction to the sight is just perfect, and it's the reason we all love this dude so much. He's pretty much us. He's a truth teller. Like, what? Another Halo? Dude, I just get... But obviously another Halo is bad news, man. These are essentially super weapons in the right hands, and the Prophet is here to attempt to activate it as a fallback plan. Sergeant and Miranda take the responsibility to track down the key to activating the ring, while the Chief is to go after the Prophet. Seems like an okay plan. It's kind of like Scooby-Doo though. Why does everyone just keep splitting up? Just stick together, man. Ultimately, the plan looks like a success, as Miranda and Johnson track down the Index after fighting through Flood. But the victory was short-lived, as the Covenant Arbiter and Tartarus the Brute Leader ambushed the two and captured them.
How you doing?
So I know there's a ton of other stories going on that we cannot cover all in this video. But that's really what makes Halo 2 my favorite Halo game. The split perspective of the conflict is incredible. It makes moments like this one really cool to see worlds collide and characters we have been following actually start throwing hands at each other. So good. But here, things are not looking great for the Sergeant. Johnson is set to be executed, and Miranda Keyes is going to be used by the Brutes to activate the ring.
There is still time to stop the key from turning.
I must get inside.
Then mount up, Arbiter. I know a way to break those doors.
But, bada bing, our hero on the other side of the fence, the Arbiter, saves the day for Johnson, knowing that the plot that he's wrapped up in is the wrong side.
You don't like me, and I sure as hell don't like you. But if we don't do something, Mr. Mohawk's gonna activate this ring. And we're all gonna die.
Tartarus has locked himself inside the control room.
Well, I just happen to have a key. Come on, grab a banshee and give me some cover. Gonna know what's coming.
Oh baby, Halo 2, man.
Not another word.
Please, don't shake the light bulb. If you want to keep your brain inside your head, I tell those boys to chill. Go ahead, do your thing.
The sacred rings, what are they?
The two of them were able to stop Tartarus together, thus saving Miranda, stopping the ring from being activated. But as Guilty Spark reveals, This shutdown led to a failsafe system involving all of the rings. Yes, more Halo rings, dude, more games. And now the only option was to control them remotely from a place known as the Ark. So again, without going too crazy down the Halo lore rabbit hole, basically all of these rings that humanity keeps discovering were built by the Forerunners, an ancient spacefaring race who was beefing big time with the Flood and saw them as the greatest threat to existence imaginable. The Halo rings are humongous superweapons, all of them, with enough gas to wipe out sentient life in a galaxy with a flick of the wrist. So I kind of think of it like this. The Flood are bacteria, and the Halo rings are hand sanitizer, but very extreme hand sanitizer that would also kill like your skin and everything else good on your hands. So it's a pretty dramatic solution to the Flood zombie problem, but I'm not going to judge the Forerunners. Now the Covenant believed that they were meant to find these rings and worship them, as well as worship the Forerunners. But of course, the Halo rings are too dangerous to be left operational, etc. Here we are. So they headed back to Earth, as actually the coordinates given by Spark to the Ark were Earth's coordinates. Here, the fighting continued, but now Sergeant and Chief had the Arbiter on their side.
The Arbiter's with us!
Come on now. You've got enough to worry about without you two trying to kill each other.
Were it so easy.
Johnson aided in recovering Master Chief in the Tanzanian jungle on the return to Earth before splitting off with his men. Here, a lot of the same sort of things happened, and you're used to this at this point. Johnson crash lands a Pelican, survives again somehow, gets captured by brutes as the Chief comes in to save him. This dude is a cat, man, but I think he's already exceeded his 9 lives like years ago. Later on, Johnson drops off helpful supplies and vehicles to the Chief during missions and remains heavily invested specifically in beating the Covenant forces to the Ark to end things for good. Now, it's really cool to me how down Johnson is to take a backseat to the Chief. No ego at all from this guy. He knows that John 117 is the greatest chance humanity has and does everything in his power to prop him up and support the cause. A true pimp, man. So this Ark, could it really be on Earth? Well, not quite, but a portal exists in Africa here on Earth. An ancient Forerunner artifact known as the Accession that when activated leads right to the Ark, or Installation 00. The control center of the whole shebang. Now, another key character to Johnson's story here is Guilty Spark 343, and I've mentioned him a few times now. He's also known as the Monitor. He's a sentient little robo-bugger programmed to look after and, well, monitor operations originally on the ring from Halo 1, but at this point, through a crazy series of events not to be discussed here and now, ends up becoming a central figure and kind of guide through the Ark. I really want to make a Guilty Spark video in the future, so let's just leave it at that. So, Johnson, the Chief, Miranda Keyes, the Arbiter, and now this twerp-ass robot Spark headed into the portal to try to figure out what the hell is going on with the Ark. And the battle for Installation 00 was on, baby. It's climax time, boys. Johnson again split off from the Chief as they attempted to bring down the shield protecting the Prophet of Truth, who right now is public enemy number 1. It is a race to get control of the Ark and thus the Halo rings. But the Sergeant and his men were overrun and all but Johnson killed. He was then taken captive again, come on dude, by the brutes and Truth to be used to activate the Ark. But his response was, well, classic.
Oh, come on. Impress me. Stop.
So I know this seems like comedy because it is funny, but Johnson was definitely trying to taunt his captors into killing him, as he would definitely rather die than be the hand to push the button to activate this thing and eliminate human life.
What's the matter, big shot? Can't start your own party?
I admit, I need your help. But that secret dies with all the rest.
Miranda Keyes, a longtime friend and ally of the Sergeant at this point, did something very heroic and attempted to save Johnson by some pretty primitive tactics. It sort of almost worked, but things were grim, and Sergeant realized that they now had 2 humans just sitting there that could activate the Ark and urged her to kill him and then herself immediately.
You're right.
Do it. Me, then you. Now. No!
Your forefathers wisely set aside their compassion, steeled themselves for what needed to be done. I see now why they left you behind. You were weak, and gods must be strong.
But thankfully, the plan falls apart for the Prophet of Truth, as the Chief and Arbiter along with the Flood now are able to step in and shut that thing down. God, boys, the story is just so crazy in these games when you look at the scope of it. So many characters swapping teams and allegiances switching, it's just, whew.
Stop the rings. Save the rest.
So with the Covenant stopped, Sergeant Johnson alive and well, the Chief and Arbiter taking care of business, all that remains is to somehow shut this operation down. After the gang discovered that there is a new Halo installation being assembled within the Ark, it seemed like the perfect bomb to set off and deal with everything all at once. This would solve the problem of the Ark, the other rings, the Flood. I mean, this is it, boys. But this is also where an unexpected villain steps in.
Oh, hello. Wonderful news. The installation is almost complete.
Terrific.
Yes, isn't it? I have begun my simulations. No promises, but initial results indicate this facility should be ready to fire in just a few more days.
We don't have a few more days.
But a premature firing will destroy the Ark.
Deal with it.
Will destroy this installation. Unacceptable! Unacceptable! Absolutely unacceptable! Protocol dictates action! I see now that helping you was wrong! You are the child of my makers, inheritor of all they left behind. You are Forerunner. But this ring is mine.
Kick his ass.
I'm getting you out of here.
No, you're not. No, don't let her go. Don't ever let her go. Send me out with a bang.
So there he goes, man. Johnson's luck finally ran out. And it's one of the few times you feel like the Master Chief takes a moment to feel the loss of a friend. This guy was his one-time mentor and now very close war brother, only to be killed by a stupid tin toy of a villain at the end of this epic-scale war. From humble beginnings on Earth to a military career that spanned over 50 years thanks to cryosleep, Johnson gave everything he had and ended up playing a huge role in the protection of the galaxy. He lived the life and died the death of a hero. He never shied away from any situation that put him in harm's way, but was also somehow able to keep an even head in a bind. For us the fans, he will always be a loved character. He went from comedic relief in the first game to a serious heart and soul character by Halo 3, and if you ask me, the games haven't been the same without him. Sergeant Johnson truly represents the best of us, wanting to do the right thing because it's hard and embracing the struggle. Overcoming personal demons to be stronger and wiser, and being able to sacrifice everything without a second thought for the right cause. And as far as a gameplay anchor, whenever Johnson shows up, we get to take a breath, laugh a little, and reset the odds in our favor, if just for a little bit. Thanks everyone very much for watching and listening to the end. I know that there are a ton of things I glossed over, like the Gravemind, Miranda's story, Arbiter, Prophet, but all of these are characters that I will enjoy taking a closer look at in the future. And I just really wanted this video to be like a chronicle of the Sergeant's life. I really enjoyed making this one. Shout out to my patron for the suggestion, Josh. Speaking of patrons, shout out to all of you. And thanks again everyone. Until next time, peace.